When a 42-year-old nurse is found bludgeoned to death, a small town in New Jersey is in shock.
It was a vicious attack.
Her hands were bound with an extension cord.
A minimum of 21 hits in the head.
I didn't have my mother to raise me anymore.
Police suspect her boyfriend, but a psychic says the killer is someone else.
I saw a man, saw a hammer, a tied-up woman in her bed.
Can a psychic's vision solve the mystery of who killed Betty Cornish?
The killer lives upstairs.
Belvidere, New Jersey, an hour away from New York City, but a million miles away from big city crime, a town where neighbors trust each other and doors are seldom locked.
It's a very quiet town. Everybody knows everyone. It's just one of those small communities.
Basically a little rural town that hadn't really changed over the decades.
Until August 8th, 1987. A frantic emergency call comes in from a man who says he's found his girlfriend dead. Kent Swigert, now chief of Belvidere Police, is the first on the scene.
I entered the apartment and observed a male standing in the living room. And this male said to me, "Is she dead?" So I walked into the bedroom and I observed a female lying face up in the bed. It was pretty obvious that she was killed.
The crime is so horrific that the Belvidere Police need help. Dave Heater of the Warren County Prosecutor's Office is assigned to the case.
It was a vicious attack. We had a minimum of 21 hits in the head. There was blood spattered 360 degrees on all four walls, the ceiling. There was blood pooled on the floor.
She was laying face up, her arms were behind her back, her hands were bound with an extension cord.
Her nightshirt was pulled up over her head.
Totally blood-soaked, along with the sheet around about her head that was also blood-soaked.
There was exposed bone, and extreme damage to the forehead.
The victim is 42-year-old Betty Cornish, a divorced mother with 5 grown daughters. She worked as a practical nurse.
She was a good mom. She liked to go out dancing, and she had a big circle of friends that she would go out with.
She had recently moved back to Belvidere to be closer to her family.
It was something I just couldn't believe. I was like, what do you mean, you know? What do you mean my sister's dead?
So vicious was the attack that at first police think she was killed by gunfire.
My sister Mary Beth called. She just said something happened and that they thought she was shot.
And I know I started going crazy that I wanted to go with her because I knew they were going to take her body to Newark for an autopsy. And I just kept saying, she's going to be alone, she's going to be alone, I want to be with her.
The autopsy report shows that Betty Cornish died of blunt force injuries consistent with a hammer attack.
When we started to find out from the autopsy reports that the claw end of the hammer was used and that it penetrated into the skull, it was gruesome.
This was an angry person. Whether it came as a result of a fight, whether the victim had fought with him, he was mad, angry at something, and he took it out on the victim.
The murder was so violent that the police assume Betty's neighbors must have heard something.
We're having a very difficult time. We're not getting anyone within the apartment complex that's giving us anything. There were no screams, there was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing unusual.
And apart from the vicious attack to the victim, there is nothing unusual in the apartment except for blood in the bathroom.
We found blood in the bathroom, and we found blood around the sink and also on the mirrors. We had made the assumption that our suspect had probably cleaned up there.
At first, it looks as if the killer came through the window, because the victim's window was removed and found leaning against the building. But a fingerprint found on the glass tells the police a very different story.
That fingerprint would have had to have been someone from the inside grabbing the window, The idea that if someone did jump in, they would have to grab a hold of the sill in order to pull themselves in. There would have had to been striations across that wooden sill from the body sliding across. There were no striations.
That leads police to believe Betty Cornish knew her killer.
We believe that that window was removed to draw us off because he was located so close to the victim.
So the police zero in on her boyfriend.
He found the body, he reported the crime. When we began to question him, he indicated that he had been out fishing that day. Some of the other investigators who were going around the apartment came into us to tell us that they found a set of clippers that a fisherman would typically use was located directly below the bedroom window of the victim. That became very suspicious to us because he said he had been fishing.
It was shocking, but I kind of thought that maybe it was the boyfriend, because I didn't know Paul that well.
Could he be the one who removed the window?
We started questioning her boyfriend more and more, and honestly, I believe he got scared.
Before police can further question him, he stops talking.
He asked for an attorney at the time. So we couldn't talk to him any further, and his attorney advised him not to speak with us or cooperate with us at any point.
Now, after 3 days and no hard leads, the people in town are uneasy.
This was the first murder that Belvidere had experienced in really 80 to 100 years. The people in the immediate area of Blair House Apartments were very, very scared at the time. There was a crowd of people that had watched what was going on, and there was fear that there might be more people in danger.
Everything, my whole complete life changed overnight. I didn't have a place to live anymore. I didn't have my mother to raise me anymore.
Nothing's ever normal again.
Residents in the apartment complex, eager to help the police, volunteer for polygraph tests, and they all pass. It seems as if the police have hit a wall.
The longer that a case goes on, your chances lessen greatly by the hour. It starts to scare you. There is a killer in the community, and you don't know where he is.
You imagine a monster. Only a monster could do something like that, and that's what we were afraid of. What kind of crazy person that could be out there.
I just wanted this person caught yesterday, you know. I remember calling the prosecutor's office. Did they find him yet? Did they find this person that killed my sister yet? That's when someone had told me about Nancy.
Nancy Weber is a psychic who claims to be able to see what most of us cannot.
It's not always in picture form. Sometimes it's sound, sometimes it's smells, sometimes it's vision, sometimes it's a feel, a fabric.
8 days after her sister's murder, Peggy calls psychic Nancy Weber and sets up a meeting.
And she didn't want to know anything. Nancy didn't want to know anything. And she took me into this room and we began to talk.
I felt this horrible, heartbreaking misery.
Without any knowledge of the case, the psychic claims to tune in to Peggy's loss.
Somehow that connected inside me with she had sustained a great and tragic loss of a family member. She had a sister who was murdered.
And then she says something amazing.
I said to her that the chief suspect is a boyfriend. She said, yes. I said, he is not the killer.
But can the psychic see who the real killer is?
I saw a hammer. I saw a tied-up woman in her bed. I saw her brutally murdered. And I thought, that's the killer.
In Belvidere, New Jersey, it's been 8 days since 42-year-old Betty Cornish was found bludgeoned to death in her bed.
There is a killer in the community, and you don't know where he is.
Her boyfriend, who found the body, isn't talking, and the police have few hard leads.
I just wanted this person caught yesterday, you know.
Desperate to find the killer, the victim's sister asks a psychic for help, and the psychic has a vision of the murder, a vision so horrific she feels she can only share it with the police.
I asked her to please contact the police involved. I said, let them speak with me, not you.
I received a call from Peggy Goebel. She told me that she had been talking to a woman who was a psychic. I'm skeptical, you know, when a psychic calls up or says that they have psychic ability. I want to hear who it is and what they have to say before I'm going to put a lot of faith into that individual.
But in this case, it's Nancy Weber.
So I said, okay, now I'm listening.
The detective and the psychic have worked together before on other cases.
I would be more than happy to bring her to the scene and get her thoughts, her feelings on what occurred here, because we're now beginning to get into a week into this case and we're getting nowhere.
No sooner do the detective and the psychic arrive at the scene than Nancy has a vision that will turn the investigation upside down.
I looked upstairs, and I saw a shadow, and I thought, that's the killer. He was going upstairs. He lives there. I pointed upstairs and said, the killer lives upstairs. I said, his first name's John, and last initial R.
She gave me the name John, and she gave me the initials JR.
The man upstairs is 30-year-old John Reese, a farm laborer who lives with his girlfriend and her 2 children.
He operated a piece of heavy equipment at the sod farm, just a working-class individual.
And I said, well, I'm not real sure that's the right guy, Nancy. He already passed a polygraph.
Not only has John Reese passed a polygraph, but he has an alibi for the time police think Betty was murdered.
Based on what the condition of the body and what we knew at that time, we were guessing that the time of death would have been somewhere around midnight. John Reese was able to tell us pretty specifically where he was during the entire day, right up until the point of about 2 o'clock in the morning, and at that point he went to bed. He alibied himself pretty well.
I said, that doesn't matter. It was such a strong feeling and strong vision.
At that point in my mind, I was beyond Mr. Reese. He passed a polygraph. She said that she didn't care, that, polygraph him again, do what you have to do, but he's the guy.
Next, Detective Heater takes the psychic inside Betty Cornish's bedroom.
Crime scene hadn't been cleaned up. There was still blood spattered around. It was scary to walk in and not know what lay there.
As Nancy stands beside the victim's bed, she is hit with another vision.
Ben, I got the time of about 1:30 a.m. roughly.
Her vision puts the time of death much later than what the police say.
And this was one of the few times Dave actually responded to me and said, no, it was earlier. I said, no, wrong. Because I had a very strong impression of a time, and I had a very strong impression of a murderer.
Could the psychic be right? Could the killer be John Reese?
She made me think more. Like, I knew he was a suspect, but I was a suspect. Everybody was. So when she kept pushing it is when I started to believe it. They found it.
Passed the polygraph. She knew that he still did it.
He was there when the police arrived. He was there when the detectives arrived. He was there when they removed the body. And he was just there. Every time someone would look, there was John Reese.
It's the psychic's final vision that turns the investigation on its head.
I see this blur of a metallic buckle that I am told in my mind is a Western belt buckle that has meaning and value to John Reese.
Heater sends an investigator to see if Nancy is right.
Reese, in fact, had the belt buckle and was very consistent with everything that Nancy had described.
With this new piece of information, Detective Heater goes out on a limb and takes a second look at the man upstairs.
I, as a supervisor, at least now at this point, had some kind of justification in my own mind for spending man hours on a man who already passed a polygraph.
He decides to take a gamble on a psychic's vision.
My boss basically told me I was crazy.
Heater sends detectives to question Reese again.
Reese was very comfortable with these 2 detectives and was willing to talk to them every day. They became almost like friends. And because of that investigative bond, Reese started talking about more things.
Detective Tom Traynor was one of the officers investigating Reese.
He gave information that caused us to believe that he might have been in the victim's apartment. It wasn't a real credible account of how or why he was in there. And of course, meanwhile, one of our ID men had developed, the latent prints off the front window.
11 days after the murder, the first solid piece of damning evidence. The fingerprint belongs to John Reese.
The trainer went after Reese again and told him, look, we've got your fingerprint on the window. What's the story? Oh, well, we're friends, Betty and I would come down there and, the window would get stuck. So, I would help her unjam the window to get it closed.
John Reese said that he was there to fix the window, and the window never got stuck. He had to put a stick underneath it to hold it up because it wouldn't stay stuck.
Another break. The medical examiner revises the time of death. Betty Cornish didn't die at midnight as the police thought. She died much later.
We got results back from the medical examiner's office, which gave us a time of death more into the early morning hours.
Just as the psychic told police at a time when Reese has no alibi.
The biggest problem that we had was the time period in the 3 o'clock to 3:30 in the morning area. We felt that there was something he was holding back.
We had his fingerprint from inside the apartment. We knew that he was lying to us at this point in time.
But the police have to make a case that will stand up in court. They need the murder weapon. Can the psychic help?
I saw a swamp, and so I told him, this is where you'll find the hammer.
Thanks to a psychic's vision. Police in Belvidere, New Jersey now have a prime suspect in the brutal killing of a 42-year-old nurse.
I pointed upstairs and said, the killer lives upstairs.
But they don't have enough hard evidence to arrest him. They need the murder weapon, and the psychic claims she knows where it is.
I suddenly saw this small body of messy, muddy water and the hammer falling into it. I thought, he dropped it in there.
Nancy, when she returned to our office, she drew us a map.
Took a piece of paper and drew my crude map and handed it to them and said, this is where you'll find the hammer.
She gave us a road, she gave us a patch that she said were woods, and she said, and over in this corner is water. And she said, I see Reese throwing the hammer into the woods.
But she can't tell the police where that water is located. At the same time, detectives continue to badger their prime suspect, determined to find cracks in his story.
He was able to give detailed information about, when he made the coffee, when he got up in the morning to go to work, and what time he left for work. But then the time when we felt that the victim was murdered was a time that he didn't recall. He just breezed right over it.
Reese started talking about more things. And those things that he kept adding into his statement during the times was things that were off, that were not talked about before.
There's a lot of little things that he changes in his behavior between, deep breaths. You could tell something is bothering him. And we just felt at that point that he was ready to tell us something.
Detectives make their move. They bring Reese in.
We hit him with all the things that we knew, walked around the table, sat down next to him, looked him in the eye, and said, John, we know you did it, and you know you did it. Now why don't you tell us about it? Approximately 20 to 25 minutes, perhaps half an hour later, Detective Trainer came out of that room and advised us that he had confessed to the murder.
I believe he knew that we knew that he was the killer, and for some reason he had to share that with us. It's hard to picture why or how, but something made him realize that, it was wrong and that he had to trust us and that he did it and he had to admit that.
There was a hammer on the floor that I picked up, and I hit her once in the head with it. I hit her 2, 3, 4 times with the hammer. Large amount of blood flowed on the bed, some on the walls. And I went upstairs. Garbage bag. Washed up my hand and everything. Had another beer and went to bed.
Later, he told the police he dumped the hammer at the farm where he works.
When we did the search through the woods and we came out, there was the water in front of us. Water where Nancy said there would be water. We went in, we recovered the hammer, photographed it, brought it out, bagged it, tagged it, and put it into evidence.
18 days after beating Betty Cornish to death, John Reese is charged with her murder.
And I remember just my mother and father and I embracing and jumping up and down, happy that they caught him, but realizing that it just wouldn't bring her back.
Despite the confession, Reese later pleads not guilty. At the trial, his lawyers suggest Betty Cornish invited Reese into her apartment.
It was very hard because we would have to sit and see the murderer there every day.
A lot of the time, Mr. Reese basically propped his head on his hand and just seemed somewhat disinterested for the most part. He didn't want to show any expression to the jury, so he just basically sat like he was bored.
And he would, constantly turn his head and look at us. I remember my mother being there, and she was crying. It was hard for her to hold back her cries, and they wanted to put her out of the room. They didn't want the jurors to see my mother crying because it would sway their decision.
The jury doesn't believe John Reese's story. What they do believe is that sometime around 3 a.m., Reese came downstairs and snuck into Betty Cornish's apartment, bound her wrists with an extension cord, sexually assaulted her, and beat her to death, striking her at least 21 times with a hammer. After a 5-week trial, Reese is found guilty of all 11 charges, including first-degree murder. He is sentenced to 110 years.
I would like him to say he was sorry. I would like him to show some remorse because he never has.
I think that if he were to say anything, that he would try to hurt us in some way because he is sick enough. He got 2 life sentences. He's eligible for parole in 45 years. So that means that he will be 72.
Or dead.
Or dead. And we will fight so that he dies in prison.
Why was the psychic so convinced that it was the man upstairs who killed Betty Cornish? He had already passed a lie detector test, yet she remained adamant her vision was correct. She knew his initials were J.R. and his first name was John. She also knew that he wore a large Western-style belt buckle. She even directed the police toward the murder weapon.
Nancy was probably one of the driving forces that kept me going back to Reese. I was willing to give him up, but she was very insistent.
Any constructive thing I can do assists Elizabeth and her soul and assists her family.
And whether you want to call it spiritual matter, whatever it is that a psychic sees, you've got to be able to believe in it. There's science, there may be the supernatural. I don't know how to explain what a psychic does, how they do it. All I know is it works.
In Memphis, Tennessee, someone is killing prostitutes. Police make an arrest, but a psychic tells a homicide cop he's got it wrong.
I knew that he had arrested the wrong man.
We knew we had the right man. There was just no doubt about it.
Then the killer strikes again. Can the psychic help the cop to catch a psychopath before he kills again and again?
It was totally evil.
perched on the banks of the Mississippi and home to the blues and rock and roll, where Elvis lived and died. Memphis, Tennessee is one of the most famous cities in America.
Memphis is like the capital of the Mid-South. It's completely different from the rest of the state. We have the river. We have the blues.
But Memphis is also one of the most dangerous cities in America. It's a city with a long tradition of crime and violence.
Memphis was always known as a fairly violent river town. In fact, during one period of time in the 20s, Memphis was one of the most violent cities in the United States.
Anywhere from homicides to assaults to prostitution, working the street. There was a lot of drugs.
There are parts of South Memphis that you don't want to go.
August 15th, 1988. 25-year-old Sharon Denise Moore is working the street in the notorious South Memphis red light district. But her last trick turns deadly. She is shot at point-blank range with a .32 caliber handgun. It's the 95th murder in Memphis that year. It doesn't take homicide detectives long to line up a prime suspect. 2 witnesses finger a man named Larry Ward.
They had canvassed the area and sent some people back out to where he had been, and actually had statements from 2 witnesses who basically tied him to the victim prior to her death.
And he left with her and came back by himself and had a pistol.
Cops soon track Ward down and corner him close to the scene of the crime. After a brief chase, he is quickly arrested.
They felt that they had a pretty good case on him, and that's the reason he was charged.
The very next day, however, the routine homicide takes a bizarre twist. Carol Pate, a psychic visiting Memphis on vacation, has an unexpected and disturbing vision about the murder, even though that murder has not been made public.
I got a vision, intuitive knowledge, if you will, that there was a serial murderer on the loose in Memphis.
Hi, I'm looking for Captain.
She immediately calls Captain Ken East of the homicide squad.
A lot of police departments really don't like to get involved with psychics, but I've always been open-minded.
I told him that I had this vision of this serial murderer and that he was stalking and pursuing prostitutes and shooting them. And I told him I had references with other police departments, and if he felt that what I was giving him was important, I'd like to meet with him.
There's no reason not to respond to her as long as she seemed like she was on the up and up.
Carol Pate uses a technique known as psychometry to connect with her paranormal subjects.
An actual photograph of a crime scene contains the signature frequency of both the victim and the murderer.
When she touches it, she says she can tune in like a radio to receive information.
I can then go into the past, present, future. He showed me some photographs, crime scene photographs, and I began to get some information. Number 1 was I knew that he had arrested the wrong man.
The wrong man. Is it possible Larry Ward is not the killer? Or has the psychic made a mistake?
The witnesses had said that he was in there bragging about shooting the girl. So we knew we had the right man. There was just no doubt about it.
It didn't really make a lot of sense to him. Nothing to back up the information that I had.
And I told her I appreciated it, and if we had anything come up, I'd call her.
I felt like I would hear from him again.
Ken East ignores the psychic's strange visions. Six weeks later, another prostitute is murdered. She's shot with the same type of gun as the first victim. Police immediately suspect Larry Ward, who had been released on bail until his trial.
He'd been out for 3 days, so we picked him up again.
But the cops are wrong. Ward surprises them with a solid alibi. At the time of the second murder, he was in a restaurant miles away. A dozen witnesses back up his story.
It doesn't make sense because here you've got him so well on the first one, and with witnesses. And so we go back to those same witnesses and re-interview them and offer them a polygraph, and it turns out they were mad at him and had lied on him.
Ken East's open and shut case is suddenly blown wide open.
We were at the dead end. It was block 1, start all over.
Carol Pate was right after all.
So I picked up the phone, called her, and I said, well, our case kind of fell through.
It was in fact true that he had the wrong man.
2 murders, and Memphis homicide has no suspects. Now Carol Pate makes a chilling prediction.
This was a serial murder. This was not going to be 1 or 2. It was going to be more.
This time, will the police listen? In South Memphis, 2 prostitutes have been shot dead. Police arrest a suspect, Larry Ward. But psychic Carol Pate tells a homicide detective he's made a mistake. Further investigation proves she's right.
It was in fact true that he had the wrong man in custody.
Now, desperate to catch a killer who had already struck twice, and with nothing to lose, Captain Ken East reconnects with the psychic.
He wanted to know if I'd be willing to come to Memphis to go to a crime scene. I said, sure, if that'll help.
Okay, great.
Even so, Ken East decides to keep his meeting and his relationship with Carol a secret.
Some of the investigators that were working on the case, they work hard on it, and if they think that I'm having them follow up on leads from that's given to me by psychics, they're not going to be happy about it.
Ken and Carol meet at the scene of the second murder. 28-year-old Laria Ann DeBerry had been shot twice. The bullets confirm she had been shot with the same gun as Sharon Moore. But who pulled the trigger? Can the psychic help the detective?
Okay. I asked for a photograph of the actual body at the crime scene. And I used that along with the energy of the location where the body had been found. It's right in through here. So that I could then get the energy of the murderer. I was able to see the murderer, to describe the murderer. I saw an Afro-American man in his early 40s. He had a goatee. He had more refined features. Wiry build, 5'8", 5'9".
Ken East takes notes on everything the psychic says.
That's a lot of description from anybody, even a witness.
Now Carol Pate's insights take her inside the mind of a killer.
This man is a multiple personality. But the murdering personality is named Al.
She doesn't know if that's what part of the name that is, but that's Al. She's coming up with that.
Carol sees 2 opposite personalities in the killer.
I got a shy personality, the true personality. But Al was a very strong, violent, evil personality. Al wants to take over.
Carol's vision of Al is chilling.
He is compelled to kill. This was a serial murder. This was not going to be 1 or 2. It was going to be more.
Ken East isn't taking any chances. He decides to use the psychic's description of the murderer in his investigation.
It would give us more to talk to the witnesses in the scene where the prostitutes were hanging out. The more you give, the more they'll give you back.
He's not done.
The psychic and the cop agree to keep in close touch. Ken gives Carol photographs of the crime scenes and the victims to tune in on any new visions of Al.
I said, you have an open line to me. You call me if anything comes to you.
What I was looking for when I was tuning into the energy is what we could do to catch him. What was his next move? Who was his next victim? Where was it going to be?
They don't have long to wait. A week after the DeBerry murder, the badly decomposed body of another prostitute, 30-year-old Linda Tratt, is found hidden in an alley.
We knew there was something fishy because the prostitutes were being killed.
With this discovery, the homicide investigation is expanded. Sergeant John Garner is put in charge.
That case was assigned to me, and then I inherited them all and became the lead investigator on all the cases.
With the body count rising, John Garner and Ken East both suspect Carol Pate's prediction is true. A serial killer is stalking prostitutes in South Memphis.
We felt sure if we didn't get on top of it that there would be some more bodies found.
10 days later, there is another shooting. 22-year-old Tony Thompson, a transvestite dressed as a woman, is driven to a remote street corner, dropped off, and then shot twice. This time the killer makes his first blunder. Tony is badly wounded, but alive, the first real witness.
He'd been shot 2 times, and 1 bullet was still in his body. So we took him to the hospital and had the doctors remove the bullet, and they did match.
Tony Thompson is able to give police a detailed description of his assailant. Incredibly, one that matches the description Carol Pate gave to Ken East.
A lot of sketches don't turn out to be exactly like the person looks either, but that sketch kind of fit her description that she'd given, and I was impressed with that.
Meanwhile, using materials sent to her by the detective, Carol has more visions of the murderer. But she has difficulty seeing past the killer's evil personality, Al.
Al was overwhelming. I couldn't see where he lived because when he would go home, Al would go away. And here would be this shy, quiet man that barely had a handle on sanity.
Prostitutes on the street confirm Carol's and the transvestite's description of the killer.
We showed our sketch, and some of the ladies of the night had seen this man.
But investigators still don't know who he is. What the police, the psychic, and the prostitutes of South Memphis do know, however, is that the killer is getting bolder. 6 days after Tony Thompson is shot, 37-year-old Joyce Thomas is killed with the same gun in the same area.
When the third murder came in down on Peebles Road that was tied to the 32, we had bullets compared, and we knew all 3 came from the same gun.
With the third killing, police released the news to the public. There is a serial killer in South Memphis. TV reporter Kathy Thurmond Edwards was assigned to cover the story.
And all of a sudden we have this on the news and a serial killer. It was quite bizarre.
3 months have passed since Carol Pate told police that they had arrested the wrong man for the murder of a young woman. It's now clear that a vicious killer matching the description that the psychic gave Captain Ken East is targeting prostitutes in a South Memphis red light district. Can the cop and the psychic catch him before he strikes again?
He was totally evil and violent, incredibly violent.
A serial killer is shooting prostitutes in South Memphis. 3 women are now dead. And psychic Carol Pate has given a homicide detective an insight into the mind of the killer.
This man is a multiple personality, but the murdering personality is named Al.
This was not going to be 1 or 2. It was going to be more.
With each shooting, police intensify their investigation. The time between each murder is getting shorter. With a serial killer on the loose, all of Memphis is on edge.
Here we are in the Mid-South, the Bible Belt, and we've got this strange story about a serial killer targeting prostitutes and transvestites. It was the talk of the town.
But police aren't totally in the dark. Carol's description is confirmed by the only eyewitness, a transvestite who survived a shooting. He also gives police another lead, a vague description of the killer's small gray car. This also fits with what detectives have been hearing on the street.
Anybody talking to prostitutes on the street? Have you had any trouble? And yeah, I had trouble with a male black, and he was driving a gray car. And
so we knew we'd kind of narrowed down to the small gray car point.
Back at her home, Carol has another psychic vision.
Hi,
Hi, this is Carol Page.
The psychic calls Captain Ken East with new information. She feels that the killer is about to murder again, but there is a twist.
I saw into the future that his next victim was going to be at a stone church in that area where the other murders had occurred. I didn't think we could stop the murder, but I knew that he could be captured because of the stone church.
We have several that fit that description, and they were downtown area. We passed this information on to the Uniform Patrol and the Vice Squad and told them to be on the lookout.
Armed with the information, police step up patrols in the area. But despite that increased presence, the very next night the killer strikes again. He shoots another transvestite, 30-year-old Mark Eric Lewis, near the Claiborne Temple, the oldest and biggest stone church in Memphis, just as the psychic had predicted. But again, he only wounds his victim, and Lewis is able to run for his life and call for help. The next day, Lewis relives his ordeal to reporter Kathy Thurmond Edwards.
All I could see was fire. And I said, "Oh, you shot me." He said, "Shut up." And I went to reach and grab him. I remember pushing him, because I pushed him, he fell back. That's how I got the second shot hit me in the neck.
Finally, police get a big break. An officer in the area spotted a small gray car leaving the scene of the crime.
Lieutenant Ralph Roby, who was a night detective lieutenant, was en route to the scene of where Lewis was shot, and he saw a small gray car in the area and just jotted down the tag number. When we came into work that morning at 8 o'clock, he was getting off. He came by homicide and said, "I saw this last night. It may be of help, may not."
And we ran the license number and found out that it belonged to James Barnes.
James Barnes is a 44-year-old delivery man who lives and works in South Memphis.
So we go to their house and talk to his wife, Diane, and she said that her husband's been driving the car and been going out at night and that kind of thing. And so we still didn't have as much evidence as we really liked, so we decided to set up a surveillance on him.
The theory was that if he leaves the house, goes to a prostitute area to pick a prostitute up, take him down in hopes of finding the weapon. If you don't have the weapon, at least we can talk to him and maybe get him to confess to it, basically.
The very next night, James Barnes drives back into the red light district of South Memphis. Homicide detectives follow him closely.
And what we're trying to do is follow him to the crime scene areas in that area part of town. And he did, in fact, go there. Well, they tried to stop him at that point because we didn't want anybody else to get hurt.
He stopped in front of the Lorraine Motel, the site of Martin Luther King's assassination 20 years earlier. Barnes tries to escape, but detectives are right behind him. Finally, he's cornered, and police arrest James Barnes.
At daylight, the investigating detectives went back out on the scene and did find a gun, and it was a .32 caliber.
The gun found at the scene of the arrest is confirmed to be the same one that killed and wounded all of the prostitutes. With James Barnes in custody, questions still remain. What motivated his killing spree? And is Carol Pate's prediction that he suffers from a split personality correct?
We came down to interview him in the homicide office, and then at one point he wanted us to handcuff him. We basically said, "What's going on with you, Barnes?" And he said, "I'm not him. My name's Al."
The psychic was right. Al was behind the killings.
Al wanted Barnes to kill his wife and children, and he would argue with him, and every time he wanted that to happen, that's when he would go out and pick up a prostitute and commit a murder to satisfy Al.
How could the psychic have known about the evil personality called Al locked inside the killer's head?
You've got to be impressed with the name Al when he's sitting there during the interrogation and he starts acting crazy and asks you to handcuff him so that he won't hurt you or himself.
Barnes was in there, but I could barely feel him, and I felt a reluctancy from him to do what was happening. But Al was overwhelming.
But the psychic has even more information. 2 weeks after Barnes is arrested, Carol Pate calls Ken East back with a vision.
Ken, I think I have some more information for you. I saw that he had taken clothing of another victim and had left it on the banks of the Mississippi. It's between a church, a small church, and the old bridge.
Of course, I had no recourse but to send somebody out there at that point. I mean, after I've been dealing with her so long, I had no reason not to.
After a search, a detective finds blood-stained clothes exactly where the psychic said they would be. A few days later, the clothes are identified as belonging to Linda Tratt, whose decomposed body had been found 4 weeks earlier.
We were all very impressed that we found what we found. It's just one more thing that was tied together as evidence.
But the bullet that killed Linda Tratt was never found, so Barnes can't be charged with her murder. Police charged James Barnes with the murders of Sharon Moore, Loria Ann DeBerry, and Joyce Thomas. District Attorney John Campbell prosecutes Barnes in court.
You can be a multiple personality and not be insane. You know, if the personality that's controlling you at that particular time knows the difference between right and wrong, he's competent.
Barnes eventually pleads guilty to all 3 murders. Today, he is being held in a prison hospital where he will remain for the rest of his life. In this remarkable case, psychic Carol Pate was right about almost every detail. The police did arrest the wrong man. She provided an accurate description of the killer.
Wiry build, 5'8", 5'9".
She knew he had multiple personalities and that the personality behind the killings was named Al. And she predicted that he would be caught near a stone church. She even made a believer out of Captain Ken East.
So anytime that you get information that's from somebody that has no reason to know it, and then you find the information is in fact true, you have to be impressed with that.
Carol Pate's uncanny psychic visions undoubtedly helped a cop catch a killer who had terrorized Memphis for months.
I wanted him caught. That was the important thing. He had to be stopped.
A business trip turns deadly when a state auditor is found at the bottom of a ravine.
Somebody was mad and they took it out on this victim before they actually executed him.
We all knew that foul play had occurred.
There's a killer on the loose and police have little to go on.
Well, we didn't have any blood evidence. We didn't have any fingerprints.
Until a psychic breathes new life into the case.
I'm seeing a murderer now. So dangerous.
But are her visions enough to catch a killer in a lie?
We knew that we were only going to get one chance to speak with Eugene Moore.
And will a psychic's chilling premonition come true?
You won't take him alive.
Shelby, Montana. Population 3,300. Part of the Montana High Line, stretching 650 miles from North Dakota to the Idaho border. It's a crossroads where Highway 2 and Interstate 13 meet, a transient place. The last stop for truckers and trains heading to Canada. On the morning of November 13th, 1989, 40-year-old state tax auditor Walter Sullivan left his home in Great Falls and made the 45-mile drive to Shelby for a business trip. He never returned.
Walt was one of the field representatives who worked out in the field, working with employers, collecting taxes, making sure that employers were reporting properly.
Sue Moore worked alongside Walter for 13 years. He was a dedicated employee who had worked for the state for more than 18 years. When Walter fails to show up for 2 of his appointments, his co-workers begin to worry.
I called the governor's office. I mean, I will never forget this. Whoever his chief of staff or whoever the person was that I talked to said, he'll show up when he sobers up. And I almost dropped the phone. I said, you got this all wrong.
Their indifference angered Sue. She knew Walt to be a family man. He'd married his high school sweetheart and was the proud father of 2 boys. It would take 24 hours for Shelby police to issue a missing persons report for 40-year-old Walter Sullivan.
We began backtracking every place that Mr. Sullivan had went.
Dave Robbins was the Shelby County investigator on the case. He learns that Walter had 3 appointments the day he went missing and only made it to 1.
We're suspecting that the last person that talked to him was Gene Moore.
Eugene Moore owned and operated a truck stop in Shelby. When police contact him, he says he did meet with Walter and that he left the same day. A week goes by, and Walter's disappearance is big news. The whole town is talking.
We start hearing that he was here, he was there, he's turning up all over town at certain times of the day. And
I knew Walt really, really well. And the idea that he was off gallivanting and sporting about somewhere was just nuts. I mean, just nuts. And of course, a horrible, horrible insult to his family.
We were developing information because we were hoping beyond hope that this man would turn up safe and alive someplace.
November 22nd, 9 days after Walter went missing. His mangled car is spotted 250 feet down in a ravine.
We picked our way down away from it so we wouldn't disturb anything, but as you peered over the top, you could see a body laying down there. So we knew we had a crime scene.
There lay the lifeless body of Walter Sullivan.
The car was pretty banged up because it went off this cliff and rolled down there. So a lot of what we did in video footage was to collect the evidence and document where it was.
It was our worst fear was realized, and we were devastated. All I remember doing is crying and wanting to know that something was being done.
An autopsy would reveal that Walter Sullivan's death was no accident.
The victim had been beaten severely about the head and the face, and that he had been shot at close quarters in the back of the head. Somebody was mad, and they took it out on this victim before they actually executed him.
Who killed Walter Sullivan and why? With no fingerprints and few clues, police revisit the last man who saw him alive. Eugene Moore gives them a more detailed account.
He said around 8 o'clock that Mr. Sullivan left to go to his place to do the audit because that's where he keeps the records. He said that Mr. Sullivan did not follow him directly to his place, arrived a few minutes later, and at that point had another gentleman with him who he described as a Native American with long black hair. He stated that Mr. Sullivan only wanted a couple years state tax returns and some checks from his ledger book, and that's all.
When police do a background check on Moore, they learn he is an ex-Marine and has been trained in combat warfare. They also learn he threatened other auditors in the past.
We all knew that foul play had occurred. I mean, we knew it. Walt had said earlier at a meeting with some of the other field reps that he was going to go to Shelby and see a guy who he was concerned about, who he knew was going to be difficult to work with.
Eugene Moore's business was flagged when the state learned he hadn't filed a tax return in more than 15 years.
We're talking about somebody who truly subscribed to that whole tax protester notion. Walt often had a history of bringing employers like that around so that they would start out being very anti-government. And when Walt got done with them, he made them see why he was doing what he was doing, and which is really what the very best of our field reps were able and still are able to do is promote that.
There was a gentleman that worked at Mr. Moore's truck stop, and this guy had been laid off, and so he went to file for unemployment, and there was no files, there was nothing on him. So Mr. Moore had turned in nothing to the state. That's what precipitated this audit that was coming from Walter Sullivan.
Police obtain a warrant to search Moore's business and home, but find no hard evidence.
I felt I had good evidence in regard, though it was circumstantial. We had no physical evidence to tie our suspect to this crime other than the fact of his story and what he had said to us.
Another snag, Moore's wife, Tammy, provides an alibi for her husband, claiming he was at home that entire evening.
It was during that time that, or after that interview, that we called him back to try to do another one, and we were contacted by a lawyer out of Cutbank who said, I now represent Mr. Gene Moore, and he's not going to talk to you gentlemen again, so leave him alone. And so we backed off for a while.
With nothing else to go on, the case is stalled and sits on the shelf for 6 years. Family and friends of Walter Sullivan couldn't let it go. A state worker murdered on the job, and no one was doing anything about it.
The worst part of the aftermath of Walt's tragedy was knowing that this employer was wandering around literally on the loose, and apparently, as we found out later, had changed businesses, had moved around up there, none of which I knew about. It was infuriating. I was mad to tears.
Finally, Sue's anger turned to action. She writes a letter to the local paper demanding justice for Walter Sullivan. That single letter hit a nerve. News media across the state picked up the story.
The pressure actually came from outside. It came from news media, Great Falls. We were constantly being called, and I think people were upset that a crime like this would happen in this community.
It pressured Montana's Attorney General to assign Joe Uribe, an agent from the Department of Justice, to solve Walter Sullivan's murder once and for all.
We had a meeting between all the officers that were involved in the early investigation and myself.
Joe, right off the bat, he saw the difficulties with the case itself. He knew everything we had. He saw the evidence. He saw the statements. So he knew what we were up against.
After reviewing the case, I felt that there were some things we could do to help get the case going again.
That something different was a psychic.
And I got home, and I turned on the TV. I was pretty tired, but I was amped up after reading the case file. So I turned on the television, and there was a program about psychics on there. After watching her on 3 different cases that she worked on, I felt that maybe she could be some help to us.
A psychic encounter was about to ignite a 6-year cold case, and her visions would stun police.
This was revenge.
In northern Montana, a state auditor is found dead at the bottom of a ravine. He'd been beaten and shot in the head. Police have a suspect, but no hard evidence. The case stalls. 6 years go by, and family and friends demand answers. Who killed Walter Sullivan? Feeling the heat, the state assigns a new investigator to the case. Joe Uribe knows he has to solve this murder no matter what it takes, even if it means traveling more than 2,000 miles to ask a psychic for help.
We decided to fly down to Florida because we had some evidence, and she wanted us to mail the evidence to her, and we didn't want to do that. I was still pretty skeptical. I'd never worked with a psychic before, nor had I ever dreamed of working with a psychic.
I was very skeptical, and honestly, I thought it was just a waste of time.
But after we talked about it a while, we thought, since the case was stalled, what harm could it do?
Noreen Renier is a psychometrist who specializes in missing persons and homicide cases.
Psychometry is touching an object and getting impressions in your head and your mind about the object. And we are energy, and a residue of it is left behind in an object. In very passionate crimes of hate or love, it seems like it leaves more energy than just a missing person walking in the woods and being lost. So homicide is easier for me because the energies are much more powerful. Although violent, they're easier for me to pick up.
Investigators use a video camera to document the session.
Give me the first name of the victim, and then what I'm going to do is just very briefly describe the victim, just enough so you know I'm in tune to it.
In our case, we brought several pieces of clothing, and we even brought the bullet that was in the victim's head.
I remember touching the items, the clothing, and I got a picture of the victim. Okay, feel facial hair.
She told us that she could see the victim and that he had facial hair. Walter Sullivan had a beard. She told us that he was short, stocky, physique, short-necked. Basically described Walter to the T.
Without a word from the investigators, Noreen has no idea whether she has locked on to their victim, Walter Sullivan.
I'm sure that they thought it was a more scientific process if they didn't react, but somehow I needed that little bit of feedback, but I kept going without any feedback.
We told her nothing about the case, and some of the things she said was just incredible.
I see a blue metal building. I see something like an antenna, like three going up, train tracks going close by. There was railroad tracks very close to the blue shed.
Remarkably, Noreen is describing the home of their prime suspect, Eugene Moore.
The physical features that Noreen described, such as a blue metal building, there was a blue metal building on the property. She said there was a railroad track close by. Well, just right across the road from him was a railroad track. And it was strikingly accurate.
At one point, a name just sort of popped in my head, the name Clark. C-L-A-I-R. I just feel that sort of name coming in. Clark. And they sort of looked at each other but said nothing.
Came out kind of spontaneously that she said this word Clark, and incidentally, the body and the car were found on the Clark Ranch about 9 miles southwest of town. We were just amazed. We couldn't believe it. In fact, the hair was standing on the back of my neck a time or two.
And now she gives them a piece of information they didn't know.
The moment she touched the bullet, she had a vision of an attack on Walter Sullivan.
And all of a sudden I was ambushed. Oh, I'm hurting. They're hitting me on the head.
We knew that Walter had been beaten, but we didn't know how many people were involved with it or what the circumstances were.
This was planned. They're torturing him. This was about revenge. And then all of a sudden, I had this excruciating pain in the back of my head.
Something went in her head there, or some pain in her head, and that's exactly where Walter was shot. We had developed information about these two other suspects, but they in fact had been eliminated from being in the area. But Noreen was able to put together for us that they were part of the ambush that occurred out at this blue metal building. But she basically laid out the scenario of what we believe is the actual fact of what happened with Walter Sullivan.
But investigators were about to be amazed even more.
God, it's so dangerous. You won't take him alive. I saw the face in my head, one eye at a time, each feature, the artist put it together, eyebrows more close to the eyes. So we had two faces for them. One is a male and one was a female.
She provided information to her artist, which very accurately depicted our main suspect and his wife.
They again looked at each other, thanked me, packed up their stuff, and left. Again, no feedback on how well I did or how badly I did. No grades were given.
What Noreen didn't know was that her visions gave police new reason to go back to their prime suspect, Eugene Moore.
For me, it brought all of the elements together, and I knew at that point that we had the right man. We'd done intensive homework. We went back step by step through his statement, and we reviewed everything he told us, and we went out to look to see if this is true or not true.
Uribe visits Moore at his truck stop and tells him he is with the Attorney General's office. He says he's there to close the Walter Sullivan case once and for all and wants to hear Moore's side of the story.
He opened up just like a flower and said, well, absolutely. I've been waiting to talk to somebody. I have a lot of things that I want to say.
This time, Moore's story is very different from the one he told 6 years ago. He states that Walter did show up at his truck stop and asked for his records. Moore told Sullivan they were in the blue building and that he should get them himself. He then says he never saw Sullivan again.
And here he comes out with an entirely different set of information, a whole different story. And of course, it was contrary to everything he told us back in 1989.
Back in 1989, Moore claimed that he met Walter at his home and that he noticed a Native American in his car. He personally handed Walter his records and watched them both drive away.
It's typical when a person is lying to you, a year later or 2 years later, whatever, they don't remember their lies. Everybody remembers the truth, but you can't remember when you lie.
Uribe decides to take a chance. After 6 years, police had no new evidence against Moore, but what they did have was a psychic scenario of how Walter Sullivan was killed, and Uribe uses it on Moore. On the morning of November 13th, 1989, Walter Sullivan meets Eugene Moore at his house to discuss his taxes. Sullivan follows Moore towards his blue shed. It's there that he's ambushed by Moore and 2 other men. They stuff Sullivan's body into the trunk of his own car, drive 9 miles, and push it off the side of Clark Road, where it drops 250 feet down into a ravine.
Moore had no idea what we knew, and that worked very well for us because it acted like we had the details of what actually happened on the day of the murder. And the more we got into it, the more broken down he became.
Incredibly, the psychic's version of the crime was true enough to convince Moore to break down and confess.
You could just see an emotional change on his face.
After 6 years, police finally have a confession. But do they have their man?
He went from a very positive, hey, I have something to say here and I want the world to know I didn't do this and here's why. But as we broke him down and as we showed all the discrepancies, you could just see him kind of shirk and shrink in his chair. And then he began to come around to the point where he wanted to, hey, if I confess to this, what's going to happen to me? And then he started trying to make arrangements or cut a deal with us right on the spot to determine how many years in prison he was going to get. He had told us he didn't want to go to prison and that we'd never take him alive.
A psychic's vision is about to go unheeded.
You won't take him alive.
A Montana state auditor is found dead near the small town of Shelby. After 6 years, a co-worker's letter would make state headlines and puts investigator Joe Uribe under the gun to solve the crime. With no new leads, Uribe asks a psychic for help. Her visions of the crime send the police back to their prime suspect. When confronted, he confesses.
His story finally crumbled right before his eyes. He broke down.
At last, police have Eugene Moore exactly where they want him. But instead of taking him into custody, police decide to follow protocol and let him go.
Our Attorney General instructed us not to arrest him because it had been so long since the murder. We wanted to put it into a warrant of arrest with a information that we would file with the judge and let a judge determine, based on the information we had, whether or not there was enough grounds or probable cause to go ahead and make the arrest.
It was a costly mistake, one that the psychic had predicted.
He's so dangerous. You won't take him alive.
He had told us he didn't want to go to prison and that we'd never take him alive. And once he walked out that door, I knew we'd made a big mistake.
When police return the next day with an arrest warrant, Eugene Moore is gone. He's spotted heading towards the Canadian border.
We knew he had a handgun and we knew he had a rifle. And we felt at that point that it was very dangerous. But we had to stop him. We called ahead and radioed ahead and had additional forces come in, and they used stop sticks, which are devices that are used to blow out the tires on a vehicle. And we had them deployed in such a manner that we got his tires flattened. And in the event of that, he even still went 1.5 miles after his tires went down because he didn't want to stop.
Police do all they can to stop Moore, and when they finally do, he tries to shoot himself, fails, and turns his gun on police.
Several shots were exchanged. 2 officers were shot before Mr. Moore was in fact shot and killed.
Noreen's premonition was right. police would never take Eugene Moore alive.
Officials say it began when they tried to arrest Eugene Moore for a 1989 murder. But minutes later, deputies found themselves on a chase. Moore led them down this road, and that is apparently when the gunfire broke out.
We didn't want him to kill himself or get shot. We wanted him to go to prison. Being these anti-government leanings that he had, didn't feel that he owed the government anything. He's a businessman, and in fact hadn't paid taxes in years.
Eugene Moore's death meant there would be no justice for Walter Sullivan. Any evidence of Moore's accomplices died with him.
All the evidence that we had, nothing could be corroborated. As far as his involvement went, and especially any closure for the victim's family in a court case at all.
We should never have allowed him to get away from us. We should have arrested him on the spot. Looking back on it all, that probably was the biggest mistake in my career.
But there's no mistaking that a psychic's vision helped police to force a killer's hand.
The thing that Noreen Rainier did for us is, police work, we did all the basics. We went back and did all the groundwork. And all the elements were there, but there just wasn't quite enough to make the arrest.
I think I gave them more ammunition and more confidence about what really happened, so when they confronted the murderer, they could bring these things out by my clues, my information, my seeing what happened to Walter and how he was killed.
I, as an investigator, would not discount any information from any source. You get it, you filter it. If it's of use, you use it, you run with it. And that's the way I view the psychic.
I think I'm accurate in all my cases. Never 100%. Nothing is ever 100%, even in this reality. In the psychic world, of course it's not. But I felt very accurate. I felt the pictures were coming. I was seeing clearly. I felt I did my job, and I think I did it well. I don't feel I solve crimes. I think I'm just a small part in helping it come to a successful conclusion.
Sue Moore's efforts to convince the state to reinvestigate would bring Walter's killer down and change the way the state of Montana did business.
Field reps now carry cell phones, are much better about documenting where they are and how long they're going to be. And frankly, if there's any question at all, they subpoena the employer into the sheriff's office. Walt was a tough guy, and he believed he could handle his job. I mean, the reason he asked to be moved out to the field from being a computer guy was he really wanted to work with employers. He had a great talent and skill for it. For me, that was really the great tragedy of Walt's story, was this guy who loved his job, loved what he did, cared so much about providing a good service as a state employee, was not served well, in my opinion, during that time. It was a very awful thing to live through. I cannot imagine what his family went through. As a friend, I know how incredibly painful and tragic it was. To me, there was just a sense that at least it's resolved.
Sue Moore was determined to keep Walter Sullivan's memory alive. She lobbied, and finally in March 2004, 15 years after his death, the state renamed a building in Walter Sullivan's honor.
Walt was, in many ways for me, a mentor. I mean, there's not a time I walk into that building and see that plaque and don't have a memory of Walt in that building. It's great to have that there, but I sure wish we didn't have to have it.
In southern Louisiana, someone is killing the elderly. A psychic 4,000 miles away says she can see the killer.
I saw that he was wearing gloves and that he was very anxious, and he was looking for a way to get in.
They knew they were getting beaten, and they knew they were going to die. It was horrific, the manner in which he beat and killed human beings.
There was a lot of fear.
going around a community that a lot of people thought they might be the next victim.
Can a psychic's paranormal insights help police stop a psychopath before he kills again? Ascension Parish, a small slice of Cajun country deep in southern Louisiana. Within the parish, the small city of Gonzales, a peaceful community of friends and neighbors that prides itself on being the jambalaya capital of the world. It's a place where no one worries about keeping the doors locked at night. But in April of 1997, that peace was shattered.
So I was on duty at the time and heard a report over the radio of a possible homicide that occurred within the city of Gonzales.
Police are shocked to discover that Lillian Philippe, a 71-year-old widow, has been brutally murdered in her home. It's the first homicide victim in Gonzales in 11 years.
It's so beyond what you expect that when a situation like that happens, it just goes beyond your range of feelings there.
She was scheduled to go on a church bus trip to a casino about an hour and a half drive away. And she was very prompt all the time. If she said she was going to be at 8 o'clock, she was there at 7:45. She did not show up.
Gonzales Police Chief Bill Landry is one of the first to arrive at the crime scene.
She was on the floor and at the foot of her bed. It's obvious that a knife was used in the attack. There were noticeable stab wounds and some defensive wounds on her hands. There was very little trace evidence that was left at the scene.
The coroner on the case, Alfredo Suarez, is unsettled by the brutality of the killing.
She sustained multiple stab wounds to the neck area. Both jugular veins were severed by the deep stab wounds to that area. Furthermore, the larynx was partially severed, as well as the right lobe of the thyroid gland. In essence, she bled to death, and at the time, in that town of Gonzales, this was a horrifying death because the people in that town are not used to this kind of violent, brutal, bloody death.
Miss Lillian's death caused a lot of concern because their quiet neighborhoods were now infiltrated with someone who had committed a murder. I mean, there was a lot of fear going around a community that a lot of people thought they might be the next victim.
But what the people of Gonzales don't know is even more terrifying. The death of Lillian Philippe is the third murder committed in the past 6 months along the airline highway. A highway that cuts through Ascension Parish, connecting Baton Rouge to New Orleans. Victor Rossi, the first victim, was beaten to death with a baseball bat. The second, Barbara Bourgeois, was stabbed to death.
Every time something like that happens, you lose a little bit of your innocence. And yes, it certainly we certainly lost our innocence during these events here.
3 bodies in 6 months. Each victim was elderly and attacked in their own home, but police are stuck.
But we were running into dead ends. It seemed like every suspect we may have come up with was eliminated.
Then Chief Landry receives a telephone call that will alter the course of the investigation.
I had received a call from a high school classmate of mine, Marcia.
Marcia lives in Honolulu, Hawaii. She is the niece of Lillian Philippe. She asks Chief Landry to consult with her friend Rose Kopp, a psychic.
It was suggested to him that I might be able to help.
Marcia had some concerns because they didn't know if the possibility if it was just a group of friends, the families that were friends together. They didn't know who was a target. She was concerned for the welfare of her family and just the welfare of Miss Lillian, to want to know if we were able to detect who had committed the crime.
Frustrated with the case, Chief Landry is willing to try anything, even a psychic.
I told him that I had worked on cases before and that I might be able to identify to some degree the perpetrator of the crime and might be able to offer some clues or hints into the investigation. I asked Chief Landry to send me a photograph of the victim and a small personal item of hers. And the photographs of people actually tell me things. I look into the eyes, and it's a matter that transcends physical reality. Once I see a person's photograph and touch an object that belongs to them, I'm able to connect better with the target.
But before the photo reaches Hawaii, the killer strikes again, this time a double homicide. Once again, the airline highway, just down the road from the home of Lillian Philippe. Seniors Sam and Luella Arcuri have been bludgeoned to death in their home. Then 5 days later, another killing. Joan Brock, 55, is beaten to death in her backyard. All signs point to a serial killer stalking the most helpless citizens of Ascension Parish. Although the body count is rising fast, police have very little information. The crime scene reveals nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA. In Honolulu, Rose Kopp is already on the case. Like a shaman or a medicine man, Rose enters a trance where she claims to be able to travel to the scene of the crime.
Shamanic journey is a trance that's induced by repetitive sound, slowly by just focusing on the sound of it. Your brain waves alter, and you feel very light. So I move out of body, flew over Diamond Head, over the Pacific Ocean. My intention was to go to Miss Lillian's house. I flew over California, Texas. I went to Louisiana, and I ended up standing in the carport. And I turned around and I looked over my right shoulder, and there was so much blood all over the place.
What Rose Kopp sees is shocking, but is it enough to find Lillian Philippe's killer? It's 1997, and the sleepy southern town of Gonzales, Louisiana, has been rocked by the brutal murder of 71-year-old widow Lillian Philippe.
It just goes beyond your range of feeling.
Gonzales Police Chief Bill Landry has connected the killing to 5 others in the area.
I mean, there was a lot of fear going around a community that a lot of people thought they might be the next victim. And you had to really keep everybody happy and make sure that they saw patrol cars and saw officers around. And so it was the assurance that we had to give as a law enforcement community, had to give the public to know that they could still be safe in a community that was stricken with a serial murderer.
Police have few clues, but Chief Landry has made a connection of the most unusual kind. Rose Kopp, a psychic thousands of miles away in Hawaii, claims to be able to see the killer.
I saw that he was wearing gloves, and his hands were in fists, and so I got the kinesthetic impression that he was very anxious, and he was looking for a way to get in.
Gloves would explain the lack of fingerprints found at the crime scene.
I saw him as a Caucasian male, and about 5'9", and he had brown hair. He was very strong. So he went around to the side of the house, and I saw him move a wrought iron chair from the porch area and move that on top of the air conditioning vent and then stand up on it. And then it stopped. My vision stopped.
And the first thing she told me was that he placed a chair on top of an air-conditioned unit and actually climbed onto the roof of the home.
Chief Landry is stunned by what Rose tells him, There is no way she could have known about that chair.
Entrance was apparently gained through a vent through the roof of the house, and then ultimately entered the residence through attic stairs.
He was like a snake, like an anaconda, or those snakes that wrap around you, and he just seized on her and was stabbing her in the neck, in the throat, and there was so much blood all over the place. And I recall her trying to get him off of her, and she couldn't. He was too wiry and strong. She couldn't get him off of her. And I just saw all the blood all over the pillow and on the bed.
Somehow Rose Kopp has seen details of the crime scene known only to police. With the pressure mounting, local authorities team up, creating a joint task force to oversee the investigation.
The task force was composed of St. John, the Sheriff's Department, St. James, Ascension Parish Sheriff's Department, and the City of Gonzales to try and collect all information.
District Attorney Charles Long monitors the task force.
The task force thought it wise to consult the FBI Child Abduction and Serial Killer Unit in Quantico, Virginia. After the FBI profiling was done, it was learned that all of the crimes, both in St. John, St. James, and Ascension, and City of Gonzales, were probably done by a single killer.
Now, certain he's dealing with a serial killer, Chief Landry once again contacts Rose Kopp.
And he asked me if I would go back and see what his motives were, if I could give a more detailed description of him.
Rose takes another shamanic journey to the crime scene.
I flew over to Louisiana again, and I landed by Miss Lillian's house. And I turned around and I looked over my right shoulder, and the dark-colored sedan was there. I moved inside the car, and I noticed on the floor of the car were gambling slips, lots of papers and betting slips and things like that.
Amazingly, Rose's vision matches with what investigators believe is fueling the killing spree.
We thought that robbery was the motive. There was no other reason to consider why someone would prey upon Miss Philippi. We knew from other cases that there was some large amount of money missing, which we felt might be for a gambling habit.
Rose also says she sees someone new, the killer's girlfriend.
And I saw her in a place serving food. So I realized she was a waitress, so I looked to see her name tag. And I wasn't sure if it was Brandy or Cindy or Candy. And then I wanted to know where the restaurant was where she worked. So I looked out the window. I'm invisible all this time, and I looked out the window, and I saw a fairly large building. And I smelled blood. And then suddenly I saw a severed cow's head. And it shocked me so badly that I came back immediately into my body. I was back in my living room. I don't even recall traveling back.
It's a bizarre psychic vision that transcends space and time, but it makes sense to Chief Landry.
Right off the top of my head, I knew exactly what she was talking about. It was a slaughterhouse. It was a regional slaughterhouse for cattle. And they had a big cow that stood up on top of a sign.
The slaughterhouse Rose can see was torn down years ago.
I mean, I got officers who didn't know that that sign existed at one time or another. I do remember it because as a kid I remember the slaughterhouse, and when she said I see a cow on a sign, it was right off the top of my head. I knew exactly what she was talking about.
But it's the psychic's final vision that will blow the case wide open.
And then I saw an old woman's hand, and I knew it was an old woman's hand because it was veiny and the skin, the knuckles were wrinkly. And she wrote, River Rat.
River Rat. What could it mean? And how is it connected to the case?
River rat is a term that we would use for people who live along the Mississippi River corridor. Or when you get into different sections of South Louisiana, the slang, the accent is a little different, and you're able to tell where people are from based on their accent.
Chief Landry may know what a river rat is, but what he doesn't know is what it means for the case. That is, until the killer strikes again.
There was a couple that was attacked outside our jurisdiction around the July 4th weekend. The suspect entered the home through a utility room window, armed himself with a weapon of opportunity inside the home, shot the female in the facial area, and shot the husband in the chest area.
The elderly couple barely survived the attack, but their description of their assailant is what shocks Chief Landry.
And they asked Miss Joyce if she had any description of the suspect, and she wrote on a piece of paper, River Rat.
Gonzales police now know they are hunting for a river rat, but can they catch him before he strikes again?
There was something going on besides robbery. He woke them up in the middle of the night. They knew they were getting beaten, and they knew they were going to die.
A serial killer is on the loose in Ascension Parish, Louisiana. 6 elderly victims have been murdered, including 71-year-old Lillian Philippe. Though police believe robbery is the motive, they're disturbed by the viciousness of the attacks.
You've got your whole community in fear of who's next. When you go into somebody's house, that's man's house is his castle. And when you're robbing the castle and killing the king and the queen, you got a problem. From the sheriff's department's point of view, from the district attorney's point of view, trying to prosecute somebody and bring them to justice and trying to calm the community. So I would say in my years of 15 years as a prosecutor, that was some of the worst. We've had some other disputes, but nothing of this magnitude.
Gonzales Police Chief Bill Landry is working on the case alongside psychic Rose Kopp.
And then I saw an old woman's hand, and she wrote, River Rat.
The latest victim has survived the killer's assault. She gives police a physical description of her attacker and also describes him as a river rat, slang for people who live along the Mississippi corridor. Now, using the FBI profile and the victim's description, police create a composite of the suspect and release it to the public. Again, Chief Landry is struck by the accuracy of the psychic's visions.
The description Rose had given me was very, very close in the physical features to the composite we ultimately got.
Only 5 days after the composite is released, there's a major break in the case.
There was someone who came forward to say, look, I know this guy. He's been spending a lot of money in a casino.
The witness identifies a resident of Gonzales, a man named Daniel Blank.
When you gamble, you have that little card you put in a slot machine, or it tracks not only your earnings, but your losses also. It tells you how much you spent as compared to how much you've actually won.
And they gathered substantial information about, $80,000, $100,000 worth of gambling that he was doing at all of these casinos.
And you compare that with what you thought his salary would be for a self-employed mechanic, and it just didn't add up. Then you look at what associations Daniel may have had with each victim, and there was some relationship with auto parts, maybe a friend of the family. Everything just started really funneling right toward Daniel Blank.
Police go looking for Daniel Blank at his last known address.
task force decided that, well, we're going to pick him up for questioning. He's got some, we checked on his earnings and his losses at the casino. He's going to have to show us some paperwork as to where these finances came from. We began looking for him and learned that he had ultimately just recently had moved to Onalaska, Texas. And so we contacted the authorities in Onalaska and sent our task force to Texas to further the investigation.
In Onalaska, Texas, investigators find Daniel Blank and question him about the murders.
It was a very long interview. I think it was approximately a 12-hour interview. And when he finally began to confess, of course, they went through each one of the crimes that were committed in detail, like a separate mini interview within the 12-hour interview.
And that's when I hit her with it.
With what?
With the thing, whatever it was, I had in my hand.
During his interrogation, Daniel Blank admits to all 6 murders, including that of Lillian Philippe. Police also pick up the mysterious Cindy from Rose's visions.
We discovered Cindy and learned that Cindy was actually Daniel Blank's girlfriend. And Cindy was the one Rose saw in the waitress outfit. Cindy worked at a little cafe. Daniel would frequent the cafe because there were video poker machines, gambling machines, and Daniel would, and I feel that's how Rose saw Cindy, but when she saw Cindy, Daniel would have been right inside gambling, so she actually saw them both there, but she only read Cindy's name, I think.
Police learn Cindy waitresses across the street from the site of the old slaughterhouse, just as Rose had envisioned. His girlfriend, Cindy Bellard, is released after making a deal to cooperate with prosecutors. In his confession, Blank reveals the brutal details of his murder of Lillian Philippe. After using the wrought iron chair to gain access to the home, Daniel Blank attacked the elderly widow with a trophy, then stabbed her to death with a kitchen knife.
Daniel Blank, in his confession, indicated he stole approximately $100 from Miss Lillian Philippe's house. My conclusion was there was something going on besides robbery in the manner in which he beat people. He woke them up in the middle of the night, first of all. If you look at it, they knew they were getting beaten and they knew they were going to die. And for some reason, I feel he wanted them to know that they were going to get beaten to death, because other than that, you could have just simply went in, stole what you wanted and leave out, or there were more humane ways. If you're going to kill somebody, there are more humane ways than to beat them with a baseball bat, beat them with a trophy, slice them with a knife, beat them with a briar hook, chop them up, or whatever he's trying to do.
2 years after the crime, on September 2nd, 1999, a jury finds Daniel Blank guilty of the first-degree murder of Lillian Philippe. He is sentenced to death.
The main factor to me was that he was taken off the streets. He was not going to harm anyone else, so that was satisfaction.
Despite being over 4,000 miles away in Honolulu, Hawaii, somehow Rose Kopp was able to tell investigators in Gonzales, Louisiana, remarkable details that at the time only the killer could have known. He did use a chair to break into Lillian's home. His girlfriend was a waitress named Cindy, and his appearance matches Rose's physical description of the killer. He had a gambling problem, and he was a river rat. For Ascension Parish, the conviction of Daniel Blank returns a sense of peace. For the family of Lillian Philippe, it means justice. And for Rose Kopp, it means vindication for the psychic powers even she finds inexplicable.
I'm surprised, happy, exhilarated, satisfied. I love catching bad guys.
not to say that Rose had everything signed, sealed, and delivered, but I think Rose's journeys did aid us to ultimately get the right guy.
In Portland, Maine, a beautiful young woman vanishes one night while out on the town.
We have no crime scene. We have no body.
Is she alive or dead?
It was unusual that a young lady goes missing from a nightclub downtown Portland and is never seen again.
Desperate, the top detective turns to a psychic for help.
And immediately, when he started talking, she was right there. I can't hear now.
Can the psychic's mysterious visions help police to find Amy?
Help them find me, help them find me, help them get me out.
Portland, Maine, a peaceful city in historic New England. But on October 21st, 2001, that peace was shattered. Amy St. Laurent, a 25-year-old administrative assistant and Portland native, disappears into the night. Amy was charming, fun-loving, and according to everyone, reliable.
Amy's a responsible young woman who didn't turn up for work on Monday, not prone to disappearing and not getting her cat fed and leaving her personal belongings behind.
I miss her. I want her back. Anything anyone can do to help would be really appreciated.
It wasn't just her family who were desperate to find Amy. The entire city was looking for her.
Portland is a small city. Everybody was aware of it. Amy's picture was everywhere. You couldn't walk a block without seeing her photograph.
Deputy Chief Joe Laughlin of the Portland Police is in charge of a team of detectives working the case.
It was unusual that a young lady goes missing from a nightclub downtown Portland and is never seen again. I mean, she just basically disappears. And there are no answers. The public's demanding answers.
And one of our best reporters went downtown, and the family was hanging up posters with her picture, and they were visibly distraught. And I think everybody just couldn't believe what was going on, and their hearts just went out to the family.
What police know is that at the Pavilion nightclub, Amy became separated from her friend around midnight. Though he searches, he can't find her in the crowded club. Frustrated, he leaves. After that, she vanishes.
Portland police continue their search for Amy St. Laurent, the 25-year-old administrative...
Lieutenant Laughlin is feeling the heat. He has to find Amy, but has few leads.
And police are asking anyone with information to come forward.
We had zip. We had nothing. We had some speculation, conjecture. We have no crime scene. We have no body. We have no physical evidence.
5 days after Amy disappeared, driving into police headquarters, Laughlin tunes in a voice on his car radio.
Q97.9, this is Vicki Monroe with Spirit Messenger.
It is a moment that will change the course of the investigation.
Hi, Vicki. My name's Jackie. Hi, Jackie. Jackie, has your mother and father passed?
Yes, both my parents are dead.
At radio station Q97.9 in downtown Portland, psychic Vicki Monroe is hosting her weekly call-in show. She's helping listeners connect, so she says, with their dead loved ones.
I see them very clearly defined. I hear them, and I also get a sensation of whatever they're feeling or how they might have passed.
Your parents are both fine, alive and well, as they put it on the other side. Your mother
says, though, that you were there when she passed?
Actually, I was.
And were you holding her hand?
I was.
And did you tell her it was okay to go?
I did.
Okay.
So as I'm listening to the radio, I said, you know what? I'm going to call this woman when I get to work and see if she can tell me where Amy is.
Can a psychic radio show host really help a cop find a missing woman?
Why not? Why not? My frame of mind is perhaps this can trigger some thought process in me, some further inquiry to the detectives, some information that we may not have thought about.
Joe Laughlin, I'm a lieutenant at the Portland Police Department.
I'm wondering if perhaps you can help me with something. Have you heard of the Amy St. Laurent case?
Lieutenant Laughlin's phone call triggers an extraordinary reaction.
I was shaking. I know that I started to cry.
It was last seen at one of the nightclubs called the Pavilion.
But I was just so stunned, shocked, and really surprised because he's telling me about this missing person who then just starts to appear right in front of my face. There is a person coming in, and she came right through for me.
Immediately, Vicky gets a powerful image of Amy.
She's exclaiming that her name is Amy, gray sweatshirt, writing on the side. I kept asking her, what does that say? And she said, Pratt Whitney. And that was where she worked at the time. Okay.
For the psychic, it can mean only one thing.
My first response was that sick feeling in my stomach always usually happens when I know somebody's passed away. So immediately there was a feeling of, or a sense of, this girl's passed.
Monroe tells Laughlin Amy is dead. And then she goes a step farther.
I knew this is a murder case.
And he's really not prepared for what she tells him next.
Okay, she keeps repeating, Amy's repeating JJJ. It's definitely the name of the man that killed me.
In Portland, Maine, 25-year-old Amy St. Laurent has been missing for 5 days. Is she alive? Has she been abducted? Where is she? The police are stumped. Desperate for clues, Lieutenant Joe Laughlin asks Vicky Monroe, a local radio personality and psychic, for help. Monroe has a terrifying vision of Amy. She's dead, the victim of a brutal murder, and something more.
I saw Amy. She described the gentleman.
His name is Jeff.
It's definitely the name of the man that killed me.
Jeff. That's what Amy's saying.
And he killed her.
She got into a vehicle with...
New evidence has revealed that the last person to see Amy was a man by the name of Jeff Gorman. No one but the police has that information.
I mean, it was uncanny. It was uncanny information, no doubt. It starts a conversation. It starts a dialogue. It starts rethinking. It starts discussion and argument, which is good for the case, because that's what we constantly do. Most cases start with a crime scene and some place to start. Here, we are trying to find a starting place. And ultimately, we found that starting place with Jeffrey Russell Gorman.
While Lieutenant Laughlin heads up the investigation, 2 veteran detectives lead the search for Amy. Scott Heracles from Maine State Police and Danny Young from Portland PD.
Gorman was just the last person known to be with Amy St. Laurent. And at that point, we had to focus on him until we could either clear him or put the case together.
Gorman is hauled in. As he is questioned, Laughlin watches for signs of deception. If the psychic is right, this man knows what happened to Amy.
This guy, then Eric, is he around? I don't know. She said that he left her.
Gorman, who wanted to appear very cooperative, was in fact very reluctant. He would come and give you his story, but he wouldn't do anything further.
I play a lot of pool.
Under close questioning by Detective Young, Gorman freely admits meeting Amy at the Pavilion nightclub and taking her to a party at his friend's apartment.
All the time. It's just we just go back over and drink. Okay.
There were 3 people, herself included. They got in the car.
I think that she left with Jeffrey Gorman. Number one, she couldn't find her friend at the time. 2, Gorman knows a lot of people in a position of authority, and bouncers and bar persons and things of that nature, so she might have felt that ephemeral safety with him.
A According to Gorman, Amy doesn't stay long at the party and he drives her back downtown.
I pulled up. I did not even put my car in park. Left it in drove. She says, I hope you remember my name. I'll call you tomorrow. All right.
But Gorman's story doesn't stack up.
Across the street from the pavilion is a jewelry store. So they had a video camera that basically shot out through the glass into the road. We knew what Gorman had for a car, so we looked at the tapes for that time period, and Gorman's car never appeared. So that clearly indicates to us that he's lying.
At the time, he also says that there's a lot of activity here, that bouncers and persons are coming and going from the nightclub. We know that at that time of night that this place is a ghost town.
Police dig into Gorman's background. They find a criminal history that stretches all the way to Florida.
His record included a lot of misdemeanor crimes and thefts and crimes of dishonesty. Knowing his background, going into Florida and Alabama and talking to the individual detectives and people down there, and we got the picture of Russ Gorman, Jeffrey Gorman, as someone we didn't trust, and nothing that he said, nothing that he said we could verify. Yeah, they did. Before leaving, after leaving the pavilion.
Gorman's suspicious behavior after the interview raises other red flags.
He has a piece of crap car that he never cleans, that he's driving around in, that his friend said a couple of days earlier, why don't you clean this thing up? And he says, oh, it's a piece of junk. There's no sense cleaning this car up. And the day after Amy was missing, that car was cleaned up, and it was immaculate. He starts changing his appearance. He shaves his head. He gets body piercings and tattoos. He's making all sorts of inquiries about polygraph and dealing with the police. He refuses to cooperate with us. He was indicating all sorts of what we call post-offense behavior. And we start building a case, starting with the fact that he never dropped her off.
So we've lost a little bit of time in there. I don't know where he went, what he was doing.
Jeff Gorman is now suspect number 1 in the disappearance of Amy St. Laurent, just as psychic Vicki Monroe predicted.
I don't know if he was back.
It was definitely Jeff. That is the name they had to go with. And I see it, yes, I see it.
But the psychic has even more powerful visions. Amy is showing Vicki where they can find her.
Then she shows me this area. It was wooded, very, very wooded.
I can hear water.
There's water. I could hear water. She also described that there was a house nearby that was significant to this Jeff person.
I am very near his home.
Police know Jeff Gorman often stays at his mother's house, located outside Portland in a heavily wooded area. New evidence shows he was close by the night Amy disappeared. He was stopped by police for a broken headlight at 2:45 in the morning.
He could only possibly travel in a small radius based on all the information that we had gathered.
This isn't too far from where he was stopped.
We established criteria for search areas. One of the areas is right near Gorman's mother's house, where he lived. We believe that Amy could be somewhere in that area.
Could this area be the dense woodland Monroe sees in her visions? It's 6 weeks since Amy vanished.
There was a huge amount of pressure on the police to solve this crime. First, because we didn't know if this would happen again to another young woman in the Old Port. And also just for her family to know that there was some resolution.
But at that time, it was just Gorman and Cush. This is at the...
The detectives became very attached to her. And in fact, at one point, because of who she was, they were referring to her as our Amy.
Amy was too sweet a girl. She was too good a person. So many of our cases, we're able to reason some of these things away. We still work very hard, but you can reason a lot away so you don't have to take a lot home with you that night. But Amy never left. She came home every night.
Lieutenant Lachlan actually asked me if I would speak to a woman named Diane Jenkins. Well, the names didn't match, so I honestly didn't know who that would be. And it ended up being Amy's mom. Diane came with me and she had a bag with her. And it contained a book and pictures. It was definitely confirmation for me that was Amy. That was the girl that I had seen.
Mrs. Jenkins, what I do is I see people that have passed away, and I can see Amy, and she's right behind you.
The vividness of Amy was very intense, and this time was going to show herself in complete form, right down to her tattoo and her sandals, so her mother would know, this is me. Don't even question this. This is me.
She's wearing a gray.
It was very important that I relay the message to her mother that I love you, you were a wonderful mother, you were all of these great things to me. I felt sad, but I also felt great relief in the respect that her mother knows at least this much, that she's okay and she's not suffering.
But now detectives face another obstacle, Mother Nature.
We had conducted many, many searches, and this was our last big effort.
Police need to work fast. It's early December, and heavy snowfall is in the forecast.
As we started the search in the morning, we were all very anxious to get moving because snow was coming. Snow was imminent. It was going to happen that day.
The snow may have prevented the cadaver dogs from actually indicating on the grave, which then would have been another 4 or 5 months.
Urgency really sums up how we were feeling. We had to find her.
Danny and Scott really believed that we were going to find her. I was just like, man, I don't know how we're going to do it. It's just the proverbial needle in a haystack.
Just as Monroe predicted, police now believe the answer to the mystery of Amy's disappearance lies buried in these woods.
This is very, very familiar territory to Jeffrey Russ Gorman. His mother's house is through the woods here, probably about 4/10 of a mile. These trails he's been through many, many, many times. He's fished these ponds. If you look over here, you can see probably 50 feet from us is water.
For hours, police scour the woods. And then,
around 2:30 in the afternoon, the search team was walking through this area, and they stepped on an area over here where the earth was soft and determined that it didn't feel right. They backed up and they looked, and they noticed some depression, soft earth, fresh shovel marks.
Could this be what they were looking for?
The dogs first come through here, and they go immediately to this pine tree here, and they alert on the pine tree. From here, they go to this area where there was a grave.
Detective Young takes charge of the crime scene.
I had taken some tools from my vehicle and dug down a little bit and searched, and I could feel basically an arm, or I could feel skin underneath.
The forensic dig continues late into the night. But is it Amy's body they have found? Has the psychic been right all along?
You need to help me get out. Help them find me, help them find me, help them get me out.
It's December 8th, 2001. For the past 6 weeks, finding Amy St. Laurent has consumed the police in Portland, Maine.
Amy is the type of daughter you'd be proud to have. And I had a daughter, Amy, the same age. It hit home, hit very, very close to home.
Amy is the kind of victim, she's the kind of person we're supposed to protect. She's the reason we come to work. And we had to get it done for her.
Now they may be close. Psychic Vicki Monroe described where to look for her body.
I see a house, there's a house, there's water. I could hear water. It's Jeff.
She also told police the name of the person responsible.
The gentleman that did this to her was Jeff.
Jeff Gorman is the chief suspect in the investigation, but the psychic knows even more.
And then Amy told me that I'm under something. I can't get out.
What does she mean? Police are about to find out.
When we're doing the forensic exhumation, I do remember finding the piece of plywood, and what Vicki had told me resonated at that point, that she was under something.
And when the plywood is removed, a gray Pratt & Whitney sweatshirt, as seen in Monroe's vision, emerges from the damp, dark soil.
At that point, we knew that we had Amy.
From the moment we confirmed, it was very surreal. We were on autopilot immediately. I don't think we needed to sleep again for a couple of days. It was invigorating and a little bit of relief.
It's an emotional moment, a relief, and yet it confirms everyone's worst fear.
I think probably the most difficult part of this case is the day we discovered Amy and finding her remains and going through the forensic dig and exhumation. You know, you have this image of a young lady who had her whole life ahead of her, and, you know, seeing that crime scene was very difficult for all of us.
In the moments that we found her, we got our first snowstorm of the season.
Leaving the site when the snow started coming down, and it was a substantial storm, too.
We all were just amazed that if it was another day, we never would have found her. And Vicki Monroe had told me that she would be found before the first snow.
And I could see it on television, where they had found Amy and what she was wearing. I do this for a living. This shouldn't be a shock. I thought, oh my God.
How could Vicki Monroe have known so much about this terrible case? Did the spirit of Amy really tell her? Vicki said Amy had been murdered. She said the killer was named Jeff. She predicted he buried Amy under something near water, close to a familiar house. She even knew about the gray sweatshirt.
I don't know how she could possibly have known any of this information.
I don't know if it's just something that I carried with me since I was born. Some people will say I'm cursed, and I say no. This isn't a curse. I feel blessed.
I can't explain it. I think human beings have sixth senses, or I know that I watch detectives develop another sense, another level of intellect or observation, and perhaps that's true.
Whatever the truth behind Monroe's extraordinary insights, the information she passed to police played an important role in finding Amy and her killer.
I think the biggest impact that her statements had on the investigation is that it stimulates conversation, it stimulates discussion, and that begets other information.
One day after Amy is found, police arrest Jeffrey Gorman and charge him with first-degree murder. At his trial, the terrible details of Amy's last night alive are revealed.
We will not know precisely what happened that night, but we believe that the assault started in the car.
After leaving the party, Gorman stops and forces himself on Amy. She resists, and he brutally assaults her.
He then takes a gun out and brings her to familiar ground. I believe Amy was taken up this road by force.
Hidden in the forest, under the cover of night, Gorman assaults and rapes Amy. Then, by a pine tree, he shoots her in the head. 2 days later, he returns to bury her next to the pond, covered by a cheap piece of plywood.
I often tell people that this is an unbelievable case. It was an unbelievable experience. It takes a lot out of you and pushes you against the wall. And I don't know how many times you can really handle that in a career, a case like this, one that you cannot afford to lose.
And there's no doubt in my mind that this man would kill again. This guy is serial sexual homicide.
In court, Gorman's own dark words finally seal his fate. Prosecutors present a recording of Gorman's mother admitting to police that her son had confessed to her that he killed Amy. A brutal killer is found guilty and sentenced to 60 years in prison for the murder of Amy St. Laurent.
Now that we have Jeffrey Russ Gorman behind bars, he will never be able to kill again. And this, to me, is sacred ground.